The dining room went quiet the moment she said it. I had just finished telling everyone at the table that I'd stepped away from my position at the firm, quietly, without drama, because my knees had been giving me trouble for months, and my doctor had finally used the word surgery in a sentence that wasn't hypothetical. I wasn't embarrassed about it. I'd worked 31 years as a forensic accountant, 31 years of untangling other people's financial disasters, of sitting across from attorneys and judges and corporate executives and explaining in plain language exactly where the money had gone and who had taken it. I had earned the right to sit down. But my daughter-in-law, my son's wife of 3 years, the woman I had welcomed into my home with open arms and genuine warmth, she looked at me from across my own dining room table, in front of my son, in front of her sister who had come to visit, and she smiled the way people smile when they already know the punchline. "So you're officially unemployed now," she said. Again. The again landed like a stone dropped into still water. "Must be nice," she continued, cutting into her chicken like we were discussing the weather. "Some people just can't hold things together past a certain age, I guess." I looked at her. I looked at my son, who was staring at his plate. I looked at her sister, who had suddenly become very interested in her water glass, and then I smiled, not a polite smile, not a polite smile, not a pained smile, a real one, slow and steady, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and certain. "You know what's interesting," I said, "is that I was thinking the exact same thing about you just last Tuesday." She blinked. The table went very still. "Pass the rolls, would you?" I said to my son. That was the beginning of the end for her. She just didn't know it yet. And I hadn't planned any of it. Not the discovery, not the documents, not the phone calls that came later. All I'd done was keep my eyes open, the way I'd been trained to do for 3 decades. The way I had never, not once in my life, stopped doing. My name is not important to this story, but the details are. I had my son. I'll call him my boy, because that's still how I think of him even now that he's 34, late in life. He was a quiet child, thoughtful, the kind of kid who read the instructions before opening the box. His father passed when my boy was 19, and the two of us became each other's anchor. He finished college, got a job in supply chain management, bought himself a reasonable used car, and called me every Sunday without fail. When he brought her home 3 years ago, I tried. I genuinely tried. She was polished in the way that takes effort, the right clothes, the right laugh, the right things to say when she first met me. She called me by my first name immediately, which I found slightly forward but told myself was generational. She had a small events coordination business, she said. Very successful, she said. She talked about it the way people talk about things they want you to believe without asking questions. I didn't ask questions. I was trying to be welcoming. They got married in the fall. Small ceremony. She cried during the vows in a way that looked practiced. I told myself I was being uncharitable and let it go. 6 months after the wedding, she suggested they move in with me. My house is paid off. 3 bedrooms, solid neighborhood. 20 minutes from my boy's office. She framed it as practical. It would help us save for our own place, she told my son. And your mom wouldn't be alone. I should say here, I was not lonely. I have friends. I have my garden. I have the Tuesday morning book club that has been meeting in rotating living rooms for 11 years. I do not need company in the way she implied I did, but my son wanted it. I could see it in his face when he asked me. That specific hopefulness that I had not been able to refuse since he was 7 years old and wanted a dog. They moved in February. By April, things had shifted in ways I couldn't quite name yet. She started opening my mail. "Oh, I was just bringing it in," she said the first time. The second time, she said, "I thought it might be something important." The third time I installed a mail slot on the front door and didn't mention it. She asked about my investments once, casually, while we were doing dishes. I told her I wasn't sure what she meant. She asked again a week later, less casually. I said something vague about a financial advisor and changed the subject. The question stopped. But she watched me differently after that. More carefully. I noticed. I always notice. The moment I knew something was genuinely wrong came on a Thursday afternoon in March of last year. My son was at work. She was supposed to be at a venue walkthrough, something about a client's bridal shower. I came downstairs for my afternoon coffee and found her at the kitchen table with my laptop open. Not her laptop, mine. She closed it the moment she heard me on the stairs. Smoothly, the way someone closes something they've been prepared to close. She said she'd been using it to print a document because her printer was out of ink. She smiled. I smiled back. I went to make my coffee. And then I sat down at that table after she'd gone upstairs, opened my laptop, and went through the recent activity. She had been in my email. Not browsing. Not accidentally opened. She had logged into my email, searched my name, and opened 7 specific messages. All from my attorney, all from the past 18 months, all related to my estate planning and the deed on this house. I sat with that information for a long time before I did anything about it. What I did not do was confront her. That is the difference between 31 years of professional experience and an impulsive reaction. When you've spent 3 decades reconstructing financial crimes from the inside out, you know one thing with absolute certainty. You never show your hand before the evidence is complete. I called my attorney the next morning from the car, in the driveway, with the engine running. Then I called an old colleague, a woman I'd worked alongside for 12 years before she retired to open a private investigations firm. I told her what I'd found and what I suspected. She told me it would take 2 weeks. It took 9 days. What she found changed everything I thought I understood about the past 3 years. My daughter-in-law's events coordination business had one client. One. A shell entity registered to an address that turned out to be a UPS store in a strip mall 40 minutes from here. The business had been generating invoices, significant invoices, tens of thousands of dollars, to that entity for nearly 2 years. The money cycled back through a personal account in her name alone. She had also, at some point in the past 14 months, had a conversation with a real estate attorney. My colleague found the billing record. The consultation was about something called a transfer on death deed, a legal mechanism that, under certain circumstances, can be used to redirect property inheritance. The attorney she consulted had a specialty in elder law. I want to be precise about what that means and what it doesn't mean. She had not succeeded in changing anything. My documents were intact. My attorney confirmed that nothing had been filed, nothing had been altered. But the consultation had happened. The research had been done. The questions had been asked. And then there was the matter of my son's bank account. They had a joint account, which is normal. What was not normal, what my colleague found when she pulled the transaction history my son had, bless him, no idea existed as a right he could request, was that over the course of 22 months, my daughter-in-law had transferred a total of $63,000 out of that joint account into her personal account. Small transfers, irregular intervals, amounts that wouldn't trigger a second glance on any given month. 200 here, 800 there, 1,400 in October. She had been methodical and patient in the way that people are methodical and patient when they have done this before. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Panera Bread and read through the summary my colleague had prepared. And I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not anger, grief. Not for myself, for my boy, for the Sunday phone calls and the hopeful face when he'd asked if they could move in, for the man who had read the instructions before opening the box his whole life and had still somehow missed this one. I cried for about 4 minutes. Then I drove home, went upstairs, and began making a plan. I did not tell my son right away. I know that sounds wrong. It felt wrong. But I needed to be certain of 2 things, that my evidence was complete and that he would be able to hear it. There is a specific cruelty in telling someone their partner has been deceiving them. Done wrong, it doesn't land as truth, it lands as jealousy, as interference, as the meddling mother-in-law who never approved. I had seen enough of that dynamic in my professional life to know that evidence presented without preparation is evidence rejected. So I waited. I gathered. I made copies of everything and put them in a safety deposit box at a branch she'd never been to. I had a second conversation with my attorney. I made a list, careful, numbered, specific, of every transaction, every date, every amount. And then on a Saturday morning when my son was home and she had gone to what she described as a client meeting, I poured him a cup of coffee, sat down across from him and said, "I need to show you something. I need you to look at all of it before you say anything." To his credit, he didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, what he said was, How long have you known? 3 weeks. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed to be sure, and because I needed you to be able to see it. He picked up the pages and went through them again. Slowly this time, I watched him read the transaction history. I watched him find the month of his birthday. She had given him a very nice watch that year. He'd mentioned it. He'd been touched. And see the withdrawal that had paid for it. He put the pages down. He didn't cry. He stared at the table in a way that reminded me so much of his father that I had to look away. The house, he said finally. She was trying to get to the house. She was researching it. Nothing was filed. Because you caught it. I didn't answer that. He looked up at me. I'm so sorry, Mom. You don't owe me an apology. I brought her here. I asked you to let her move in. His voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly, the way voices do when people are working very hard to hold themselves together. You loved her, I said. That's not a character flaw. What happened next was not fast and it was not clean, but it was thorough. My son consulted a divorce attorney that same week. He did not tell her. He changed his direct deposit. He moved the money that remained in the joint account into a new individual account, which he had every legal right to do. He documented everything my colleague had found, worked with his attorney to organize it, and requested a formal accounting of the shell business, which, under the circumstances his attorney outlined, she was obligated to provide. She came to me first. I don't know what she expected. Perhaps she thought I was the softer target. Perhaps she'd spent 3 years watching me garden and host book club and make Sunday dinners and concluded that I was someone who could be reasoned with or managed or charmed. She sat across from me in the living room with her hands folded in her lap and told me that there had been misunderstandings, that money had been moved for tax reasons, that she loved my son, and that whatever I thought I had found, she could explain. I let her talk. When she finished, I said, I spent 31 years reconstructing financial fraud for federal proceedings. I've testified in 42 cases. The documents I've put together have already been reviewed by 2 attorneys. I paused. There are no misunderstandings here. She stared at me. The dinner, she said after a moment. When I said, it doesn't matter, I said, that's not what this is about. And it genuinely wasn't. The cruelty at the dinner table had stung, yes. But what I was sitting across from now wasn't personal. It was a pattern. It was a system. It was the kind of thing I had spent my entire career learning to recognize, and the fact that it had been aimed at my family did not change how I would handle it. Carefully, completely, and without leaving gaps. She left that afternoon. She was out of the house within the week. The divorce finalized 8 months later. The shell business was dissolved. Her attorney negotiated a settlement that required repayment of a portion of the transferred funds, not all of it, but enough that my son could start again without the weight of it. There were no criminal charges filed, which I will be honest about. The evidence, while clear to a trained eye, was structured in a way that made criminal prosecution complicated. Her attorney was good. Mine was better. The civil resolution was what it was. My son moved back into his old room for a while. Not forever. He has his own apartment now, 20 minutes away, and he calls on Sundays. The first Sunday after he moved out, he called at exactly 11 a.m. the way he always had, and when I answered, he just said, "Hey, Mom," and I said, "Hey, sweetheart," and we talked for an hour about nothing in particular. And that was the best conversation I had had in 3 years. He bought me a plant for my birthday, a big fern. He carried it in himself and set it in the kitchen window and said, "I figured you could add it to your collection." And I said, "It's perfect." And I meant it. People ask me sometimes, well-meaning people who hear parts of this story. They ask if I feel vindicated, if I feel angry, if I wish I had caught it sooner. I don't feel vindicated exactly. Vindication implies that someone doubted me and no one had the chance to, because I didn't announce what I was doing while I was doing it. Anger passed quickly. It's a useful emotion in small doses and a corrosive one if you let it sit. As for catching it sooner, I think about this more than I'd like to admit. There were signs, the mail, the laptop, the questions about the investments. There were signs, and I noted them. And I moved carefully because moving carefully is what I know how to do. I don't know that moving faster would have changed the outcome in any meaningful way, The damage that was done before I knew to look. What I know is this: I am 63 years old. I have a paid-off house and a healthy garden and a book club that just started a very long novel about a family dynasty in 1920s Ireland. I have a son who calls on Sundays. I have 31 years of work that I am proud of, and 2 good knees that are, after surgery and physical therapy, performing better than they have in a decade. And I have never, not once, in my professional life or my personal one, allowed someone else's assessment of my value to become my own. That woman looked at me across my dining room table and said, essentially, "You are finished." She said it because she believed it. Because she had watched me putter around my garden and assumed that soft edges meant soft thinking. She was not the first person to make that mistake. She will not be the last, but I'll tell you what I told the Tuesday book club when one of the women asked me how I'd stayed so calm through all of it. I said, "I spent 30 years following the money. All you have to do is be patient and let people show you who they are. They always do." She nodded and poured me more tea, and we went back to our book, and outside the window my new fern was doing beautifully in the afternoon light. There's something I've learned, not from a book, not from a lecture, but from 31 years of sitting across from people who thought they had gotten away with something, and it's this: the choices we make in private always find their way into the light. Not because the universe is watching with a clipboard, but because patterns repeat, because people who deceive once have almost always deceived before, and they will deceive again, and eventually the threads become visible to anyone paying close enough attention. Petra paid attention to the wrong things. She watched me garden. She watched me make dinner and host book club and wave to the neighbors. She watched me and decided she understood what she was looking at. That was her first real mistake, and in some ways her only one, because everything that followed came directly from that miscalculation. I don't say that with satisfaction exactly. I say it because it's true and because I think it matters. She wasn't undone by bad luck or coincidence. She was undone by the assumption that age is the same as diminishment, that a woman who has stepped back from a demanding career has also stepped back from her own mind. She built her entire plan on that foundation, and the foundation was wrong. My son Colin is a good man who trusted the wrong person. I've thought about this more than I'd like to admit, turning it over on quiet mornings before the rest of the house woke up. He didn't fail some moral test. He loved someone, and loving someone means extending them the benefit of the doubt in ways that can leave you exposed. The question I kept coming back to wasn't why he trusted her. It was whether I had given him enough, over the years, of what it looks like to trust yourself first, to verify, to ask a second question when the first answer sounds too smooth. I hope this has been part of that education, a late one and a hard one, but an education nonetheless. What I want people to take from this, if they take anything, is not the outcome. The outcome was what it was, imperfect and partial the way most real outcomes are. What I want them to take is the middle part, the 3 weeks between finding my laptop open and sitting down across from my son with a folder full of documents. That part wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and methodical and sometimes very lonely. It required me to keep my face neutral at the dinner table while she passed the salt. It required patience I didn't always feel. But it was the right way. Not because being strategic is inherently noble. It isn't, it's just practical. But because the truth needed to be solid before it could be useful. A half-built case helps no one. Grief and anger presented as evidence convinces no one. The work had to be done properly or it wouldn't hold. Integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself about what the situation actually requires. Sometimes it requires you to sit quietly and do the unglamorous work while someone underestimates you. Sometimes that's the most powerful position you can occupy. I am 63 years old. My knees are better. My fern is thriving. My son called last Sunday at 11, and we talked for an hour about a book I'd recommended and a hiking trail he wants to try, and at no point did either of us mention Petra's name. That, I think, is what moving forward actually looks like. Not a dramatic closing statement, just a Sunday phone call and a fern in the window, and the quiet satisfaction of having done the right thing at every step, even when it was hard, even when no one was watching, especially then.